must never forget the shooter's heinous act that day. And the victims and survivors should never have been trapped with that shooter for more than an hour as they waited for their rescue. The families of the victims and survivors deserved more than incomplete, inaccurate, and conflicting communications about the status of their loved ones. This community deserved more than misinformation from officials during and after the attack. Responding officers here in Uvalde, who also lost loved ones and who still bear the emotional scars of that day, deserve the kind of leadership and training that would have prepared them to do the work that was required. Our children deserve better than to grow up in a country where an 18-year-old has easy access to a weapon that belongs on the battlefield, not in a classroom. And communities across the country and the law enforcement officers who protect them deserve better than to be forced to respond to one horrific mass shooting after another. But that is the terrible reality that we face. Aftermath. I am also grateful to the entire Critical Incident Review team. 75 minutes after the first officers arrived on scene, officers finally entered room 111. The subject engaged the entry team with gunfire, and the officers responded with fire. 77 minutes after the first officers arrived on the scene, and after 45 rounds had been fired by the active shooter, the shooter was killed. The massacre at Robb Elementary shattered families throughout this community and devastated our country. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed, and untold numbers of students, teachers, and law enforcement officers were injured. The law enforcement response at Robb Elementary School on May 24, 2022, and in the hours and days after, was a failure that should not have happened. We hope to honor the victims and the survivors by working together to try to prevent anything like this from ever happening again, here or anywhere. I met with some of the survivors and the loved ones. But within minutes of arriving inside the school, officials on scene transitioned from treating the scene as an active shooter situation to treating the shooter as a barricaded subject. This was the most significant failure. That failure meant that law enforcement officials prioritized the protracted evacuation of students and teachers in other classrooms instead of immediately rescuing the victims trapped with the active shooter. It meant that officials spent time trying to negotiate with the subject instead of entering the room and confronting him. It meant that officials asked for and waited for additional responders and equipment instead of following generally accepted active shooter practice and moving toward the shooter with the resources they had. It meant waiting for a set of keys to open the classroom door, which the report concludes was likely unlocked anyway. And it meant that the victims remained trapped with the shooter for more than an hour after the first officers arrived on scene. Last night, the chaos and confusion that defined the law enforcement response while the shooter remained a threat also defined the aftermath of the shooting. For example, surviving victims, some with bullet wounds and other injuries, were put on buses without being brought to the attention of medics. Some families were told that their family members had survived when they had not. And victims, families, and community members struggled to receive timely and accurate information about what had occurred at Robb Elementary.
I hope that the failures end today and that local officials do what wasn't done that day, do right by the victims and survivors of Robb Elementary, terminations, criminal prosecutions. And our state and federal government enact sensible gun laws, because Robb Elementary began the day an 18-year-old was allowed to purchase an AR-15.
It's hard enough waking up every day and continuing to walk out on these streets and walk to an HEB or drive to an HEB and see a cop that you know was standing there while our babies were murdered and bleeding out. It's hard enough that. But this community doesn't care, and I hope this makes y'all.
These were children. All they wanted to do was play. There's no reason this should have happened. They should have did. They ignored the training that was supposed to be since Columbine, and they ignored it.
Were they really afraid of this kid? No. They were afraid of his weapon. And it turns out that even some of these well-trained officers are human beings. And guess what? We've learned from this event, from Parkland and other events where law enforcement got cold feet. These people were scared. They were scared because they're human beings, and they were scared of getting killed. This 18-year-old kid was able to walk into a store down the street and acquire a military weapon, a Daniel Defense AR-15. And within about a week, he acquired another one. The day he turned 18, he had made his decision long in advance. In fact, he had ordered 60 30-round magazines, and they were delivered to his home. How did that happen? How did this 18-year-old kid even know enough to know how to equip himself in this way? What happened? What are the means by which gun companies are marketing these weapons to our children? How are they reaching them? Where's the role of marketing and the gun companies in this report? There's no fault or investigation whatsoever.
Let's go. GPS car and foreground, background.
Yeah. Well, I think the volume of pages speaks volumes, really. You know, that's a whole lot of detail. It's a whole lot of research. It takes a look into very comprehensive, you know, it actually names people in there that should be the leaders that we've been calling out all this time, you know, and for whatever reason, the community seems to disagree with us. Seems to think that they did whatever they could, not acknowledging the fact that they had a certain responsibility, a certain training that they should have exercised that day. And the training was not to sit back and watch people get executed, you know, listen to the screams and the phone calls. So something like this basically illustrates that every second counts. You see this in the community for whatever reason continues to vote for the same individuals, knowing that if something like this were to happen again, you'd get the same exact response. I hope that there is. I hope that there's going to be something where, you know, if the DA refuses to do her job, that maybe lawsuits, you know, naming individual people, maybe that's one way to get to on the civil side. You know, but I'm hoping that the DA can see this and that the community gets behind this and says, you know, you got to take some kind of action and not just simply ignore it. I don't have a lot of confidence, to be honest with you, in the district attorney. Doesn't communicate, doesn't come out, issue statements or anything like that. You know, it just seems like she's way in the wire head. I don't think she's capable of actually exercising something like this. But, you know, you hope for the best, but the past will tell you, you know, basically what your outcome's going to be. Someone besides the families, people that were directly impacted by it, survivors and victims alongside, you know. It's nice to see that an independent person or organization like the DOJ can come out and reaffirm everything that we've been saying. But you have that missing link. The other missing link is who will read through it, right? Is it going to be the same people that have been involved in this, or is it going to be people that have already closed their minds and said, really nothing bad happened? They did the best they could. That's what's disappointing. You know, people go about their lives, you know, they don't take the time to educate themselves and understand what happened to failures. It's not until it hits their house.
From what we've seen with this report, you know, I commend the DOJ on doing this, is that although there isn't every name of the officers that were there so that we can hold them accountable, because we have to do our own dating most of the time, there are names that are named. And it is time, because our community is so divided because of this, because they don't want to believe that the people that they grew up with failed our children and they stand against us. I'm hoping that they read this and they see Johnny Phil's name, or Mariano Pargas, who is a county commissioner right now, or Constable Zamora, who is running for re-election. There are names in there, and the community needs to see this, and y'all need, because the DOJ stamp is on there, maybe y'all will start taking us seriously now, instead of telling us to move on, telling us to sweep it under the rug, and not doing a damn thing about it. We need our community. It's hard enough waking up every day and continuing to walk out on these streets and walk to an HEB or drive to an HEB and see a cop that you know was standing there while our babies were murdered and bleeding out. It's hard enough that this community doesn't care, and I hope this makes y'all. I also hope that this lights a fire up under the district attorney's ass, because we know that she has not done a damn thing, and we refuse to accept that. Do your job.
Yes. And I did. I took it around the city. Our teachers need your strength for many years ahead. There's only one way to help.